Hi bestie, if you're watching to this point, please subscribe. Turn on your post notifications to always be notified when I post a new video. And please don't skip my ads, they really help this channel. Share and yeah, back to the story. As she approached the ornate front door, she hesitated, her hands hovering over the brass knocker. The driver, a kindly faced man in his mid-50s, peeped at her through the rearview mirror. "Is everything okay, miss?" he asked with a concerned tone. "Everything is perfect," Precious replied, mustering a bright, reassuring smile. She hoped it marks the swing of uncertainty gnawing at her stomach. "Glad to hear that," the driver said, nodding warmly as she stepped out onto the cobblestone path. The front door swung open with a creak, and Precious was greeted by a security man she didn't recognize. It was new, with a weathered face that spoke of many trials, and a kind smile that softened his otherwise stern appearance. "You resemble your mama," he said, his voice carrying a note of familiarity mixed with a hint of respect. "Welcome, small madam." "Thank you," Precious replied, her voice trembling slightly as she stepped inside. She started to ask if her mother was home, but then thought better of it. Instead, she focused on the reassurance she repeated in her mind, like a mantra. "I just need to survive today. I just need to survive today." The interior of the house was as she remembered, elegant and imposing. The smell of a sumptuous feast wafted through the air, mingling with the sound of her mother and maid's animated conversation from the kitchen. Precious' heart raced as she walked through the ground foyer, with its marble floors and golden chandeliers. She could hear snippets of her mother's voice, sharp and authoritative and unmistakable. "Make sure the roast is tender, we don't want any complaints." Mrs. Williams' voice cut through the dim. Precious tried to calm her nerves, forcing a bright, unwavering smile as she approached the kitchen. Her mother stood at the stove, her back straight and posture commanding. The sight of her, as poised and polished as ever, only made Precious feel smaller. "Hi, Mom," Precious greeted, her voice soft but laden with the weight of apprehension. Mrs. Williams turned slowly, her face a mark of practiced indifference that barely concealed her critical eye. "Thank God you arrived on time," she said, her tone clipped. "Go upstairs and shower. I've placed a beautiful dress in your closet. We'll be having company for dinner tonight." She paused, her gaze hardening slightly. "Don't disgrace me," she added, with a cold edge before turning back to the stove. Precious felt a pang of hurt, but tried to force herself to nod. "Yes, Mom." As she climbed the elegant staircase, her fingers brushed the polished banister. Each step echoed with the memories of her childhood, moments of both warmth and discipline. The soft light from the stained glass windows created a mosaic of colors on the walls, a stark contrast to the churning emotion inside her. In her room, she found the dress, a stunning emerald gown that shimmered under the soft light. The sight of it made her pause, a mixture of awe and dread swelling within her. Her mother's expectations were always high, and tonight was no different. The thought of facing the unknown guests, being scrutinized and measuring up to her mother's standard, felt like a mountain she had to climb. As she showered, the warm water cascading over her felt almost therapeutic, but the tension remained. She carefully dried herself and dressed, the fabric of the gown clinging to her like a second skin. She glanced at herself in the mirror, trying to steady the unease that clung to her. Descending the stairs, she caught her reflection in the hallway mirror. The dress was beautiful, but it did little to soothe the knot of anxiety in her stomach. As she approached the dining area, she could hear the murmur of voices and the clinking of cutlery. The house was bustling with activity, and she knew that her mother's guests would soon arrive. Stilling herself, Precious took a deep breath and walked into the dining room, ready to face the evening with the grace and composure her mother expected. In the dimly lit dining room, as Precious' eyes scanned the room, her eyes landed on Juwon. "Juwon, what are you doing here?" Precious asked, with surprise evident in her voice. The room was elegantly decorated, with a large mahogany dining table, pristine white tablecloth, and sparkling silverware. The aroma of the meal wafted through the air, mingling with the tension that hung heavily. "Hello, Precious." Mrs. Bankole, Juwon's mother and Mrs. Williams' best friend, greeted with a warm, a bit weary smile. "Good evening, ma," Precious responded politely, attempting to mask her unease. Sitting next to Juwon, looking at him for an explanation. Honestly, my precious, I don't know, he whispered. Mom literally dragged me here after calling me to come like it was an emergency. He offered with a smile. Just as the words left his mouth, Mrs. Williams, appearing from the kitchen with a maid, entered with a flourish, her eyes skimming over Precious with a touch of disdain. Dinner is served, she announced, a radiant smile reserved for everyone but Precious. Precious' hands trembling slightly as she placed them in her laps. She glanced at Juwon, who was staring at her with a hint of concern. Mrs. Williams, noticing the subtle exchange, raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Mr. Bankole and your father will be joining us soon. They are outside discussing some matters, Mrs. Williams said, her tone dismissive. Precious' lips tightened as she leaned in slightly. He is not my father, she whispered. Her voice barely audible but laced with a bitterness she couldn't quite hide. Mrs. Williams' head snapped in her direction, her eyes flashing with sharpness. He practically raised you, Precious. Better than your own father, who was never around. Precious' eyes hardened, her courage fueled by a deep-seated anger. And whose fault is that, Mom? Mrs. Bankole, sensing the growing tension, quickly intervened. What a delicious meal this is, isn't it, Juwon? She said, attempting to redirect the conversation. Juwon, eager to shift the focus, nodded. Yes, Mom, Mrs. Williams is definitely a great cook. Mrs. Williams laughed slightly, though the sound was somewhat forced. Oh, you flatter me. I just supervised the maid. She cooked it. Well, you did a great job, Mrs. Bankole added, her tone more soothing now as she tried to ease the awkwardness. The dining room door creaked open and Mr. Bankole and Mr. Williams entered, their faces lighting up as they greeted the assembled guests. They took their seats and the conversation shifted to lighter topics. The atmosphere, however, remained tense with the unspoken tension between Precious and Mrs. Williams. As the meal progressed, Mr. Bankole cleared his throat, drawing everyone's attention. We've gathered here tonight to discuss something very important, he began, his voice steady but carrying an undercurrent of excitement. Juwon looked at him expectantly, his earlier nervousness replaced with a hopeful curiosity. Precious, on the other hand, felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She glanced at Juwon, her expression a mix of apprehension and irritation. Mr. Williams took over, his voice carrying a note of finality. We believe that it's time for Juwon and Precious to think about their future together. Precious' fork clattered onto the plate. As she stared at Juwon, her eyes wide with disbelief. What are you talking about? She demanded, her voice rising in pitch. Is this some kind of joke? Juwon looked at her with a mixture of surprise and mid-embarrassment. I didn't know, he said, quietly, clearly caught off guard. Mrs. Williams, catching the distress in Precious' voice, added, It's not a joke, Precious. It's a wonderful opportunity for both of you. Wonderful, Precious echoed, her voice trembling with frustration. And you think I'm just going to accept this without a word? This is my life we're talking about. Juwon shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his earlier excitement now dimmed by Precious' reaction. I didn't mean to cause any trouble, he said softly. I'm also surprised. The tension at the table thickened as Precious' face flushed with anger. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping harshly against the floor. I need some hair, she said coldly, her gaze fixed on Juwon as she walked out of the room. The remaining guests exchanged uneasy glances. The pleasant veneer of the evening shattered. Juwon watched Precious leave, a pang of guilt and confusion settling in his chest. Mrs. Bankole attempted to smooth things over with polite conversation, but the atmosphere remained strained. The dinner ended on a somber note, with Precious' absence casting a shadow over the gathering. Juwon's earlier enthusiasm was replaced by every sense of disappointment, and as he prepared to leave, he couldn't shake the feeling that the evening had altered the dynamics between him and Precious. Later that night, Precious lay in bed, the soft glow of the bedside lamp casting gentle shadows around her. She looked around at the walls that had witnessed so many of her milestones, her first crush, the stink of her broken heart, the tense argument with her mother. The room, once a sanctuary, now felt like a confining prison, with her mother as the warden, who controlled her every move. The weight of her current situation pressed heavily on her mind. I can't let her control me like this, Precious thoughts. Her brow furrowed. Why did I ever come back here? A sudden light tap on her window startled her from her thoughts. Her room, located on the first floor, had a window that could easily be accessed from outside. As she put back the curtains cautiously, her eyes widened in surprise. There stood Juan, his face illuminated by the soft street light. He held the tub of ice cream in his hands, his expression a mix of nervousness and determination. Juan, Precious whispered, her heart skipping a bit. What are you doing here? Juan gave a sheepish grin. I brought peace offering, he said, holding up the ice cream. The gate man let me in. He's my guy, you know. Precious couldn't help but smile at his mischievous tone. You know him? Yeah, I do. He helped me out a couple of times before. Anyway, can I come in? With a soft sigh, Precious opened the window, wider, allowing him to sleep inside. The night air, cool and crisp, mingled with the warmth of their shared moments. As Juwon settled onto her bed, the two of them sat cross-legged on the floor, the tub of ice cream between them. Precious scooped out a spoonful and took a tentative bite. So what's this all about? She asked, her voice a mix of curiosity and amusement. Juwon looked down at the tub, then back at her. Honestly, I didn't plan to ask you out this way, he said, his voice softening. But since we're here, I wanted to let you know something. Precious tilted her head, her eyes searching his face. And what's that? He took a deep breath, his cheeks flushing slightly. I wasn't upset about our parents' plans, not really. The truth is, I liked you for a long time. I know our parents want us to get married soon, but I think that's not all there is to it. I would be honored to take you out on dates, to show you how a relationship with me could be not so bad. Precious felt a flutter in her chest. She looked at him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes. You really mean that? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Juwon nodded, his eyes meeting hers with a hopeful glint. I do. A silence settled between them, filled with the gentle hum of the night and the occasional creak of the house. Precious took another spoonful of ice cream, savoring its sweetness and offering it to Juwon with a small playful smile. Yeah, try this. It's not a date, but it's something. Juwon laughed softly, accepting the spoonful with a grateful nod. I'll take what I can get. As they continued to eat, the tension between them slowly melted away. They spoke about everything and nothing. School, their favorite movies, dreams for the future. It was a conversation that flowed effortlessly, their laughter mingling with the night's tranquility. As the ice cream dwindled to the bottom of the tub, Juwon looked at Precious with a tender gaze. I know it's a lot to ask, but would you consider giving us a chance? Not just because of our parents, but because maybe we could make something good out of this. Precious' heart swelled at his words. She met his gaze, seeing not just the boy who had been her friend, but someone who genuinely cared for her. Maybe, she said softly, things might turn out alright. Juwon stood up, preparing to leave, but paused by the window. He turned back to her with a warm smile. I hope so. Good night, Precious. Good night, Juwon, she replied, watching as he slipped out the window and disappeared into the night. Precious closed the window and leaned against it, her thoughts a whirlwind of emotions. For the first time in a long time, she felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, the future wasn't as bleak as she had feared. Juwon sat on the edge of his bed, the room cast in shadows. The closet door stood slightly ajar, revealing a meticulously organized collection of photographs and mementos. He had spent countless hours creating a secret archive, a shrine to Precious that now lay open before him. With an unsettling calm, Juwon reached into the closet and carefully extracted a small hornet box. His hands shook slightly as he opened it, revealing a series of photographs arranged in perfect order. His eyes flickered with a mix of obsession and satisfaction as he picked up one of the pictures. Precious at the school events, her laughter captured mid-chime, completely unaware of the lens that captured her. A soft, almost whisper escaped his lips. My Precious. The phrase was uttered with a chilling intensity, as if he was addressing a prized possession rather than a person. He stared at the photograph, his pupils narrowing. So beautiful, he murmured. His voice a blend of adoration and something darker. He gently caressed the edges of the photo, his fingertips lingering with an unsettling possessiveness. The closet was filled with more than just photographs. There were notes, sketches, and even a lock of her hair he had somehow managed to obtain. Each item was a testament to his meticulously obsessive fixation. Juwon's gaze was fixed, almost predatory as he shifted through the contents. He picked up another photo. This one was a candid shot of her walking in the park. A smile widened into a disturbing grin as he studied her with an unnerving focus. "You see, Precious," he whispered, "I've watched you. I know everything about you, and soon you'll see that it's meant to be." He placed the photo back into the box with exaggerated care, as though it were a sacred artifact. His fingers lingered on the lid as if to seal away his most prized possession. His breathing growing heavier. Juwon's gaze turned cold and calculating. "You don't understand yet, but you will," he said, almost to the empty room. "You will understand soon enough what it means to be truly seen, to be truly loved." With a final lingering look at the content of the box, he closed it slowly and placed it back in the closet. The room fell into a heavy silence, broken only by Juwon's steady rhythmic breathing. As he stood up, his eyes glinted with a dangerous mix of hope and obsession. He turned off the lamp, the room plunging into darkness, and left the closet to its secretive contents, his private world of admiration and control.